Hello, my name is Rachel, and today I'm going to bring you some of my favorite books that I read this past fall. Let's jump right in. So first up is a series. I basically tore through the series this fall, and that's the Truly Devious series by Maureen Johnson. It took me a while to finally decide to pick this up, and I felt like each one left on a big enough cliffhanger that I had to move on to the next one. So I read all three of these this fall, which I think in and of itself means that it's got to be up in the favorite list, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and add it. And basically what you need to know about the series is it's a creepy boarding house where some things go awry and they've got to solve the mystery, essentially. So our main character, Stevie, has a gift for thinking through like crime style puzzles, and she's accepted to this very prestigious boarding school. And when she arrives, she kind of has the intention to solve the long-standing mystery of the original creator of the school. His wife and daughter went missing, and then he ended up dying. So she wants to solve this mystery, but she's trying to kind of keep it under wraps because I think she's a little embarrassed about that, and she's surrounded by people who have kind of more outward skills, and she feels like maybe she doesn't belong. And then lo and behold, somebody dies at the school, and then she decides to start investigating that. And that's kind of what you're following through all three books. Both of these murders kind of tie in throughout all the books. So I thought it was pretty interesting. I wouldn't say these are my favorite mysteries ever, but they were definitely fascinating enough to keep me wanting to read. I had to know what happened next at the end of each book. So I read all three of these this fall, and I would recommend you read them either in the fall, maybe even in the winter would be a good time to read them because it gives you those kind of vibes. But I would definitely recommend these, especially if you like YA murder mysteries. Next up is 56 Days by Catherine Ryan Howard, and I would recommend this book simply on the fact that I found it so interesting that I ended up reading it like in one day. I had a day off of school and I sat down and picked it up to read it because we were reading it for my book club, and I ended up finishing it in that day. Like I barely got up, I read the whole thing. I don't think this is going to be my favorite mystery thriller ever, but it had a very interesting premise, which is that this new couple has just met and just started to kind of build a relationship when COVID hits, and they decide that they're going to quarantine together. And then within 56 days, one of them is dead. I mean, that's a really interesting premise. I was concerned going into this, since we are still in the pandemic, that it would be just not great. Because I think it is, at this point, especially now that we've been in for years, it's kind of hard to read about the pandemic. I just don't want to. I mean, I live it, so I don't want to read about it. But I think this handled it in a very interesting way. This takes place in Dublin, and obviously I am in the U.S. here in Ohio, and it was just interesting to see how things kind of escalated in the same way, and how the rules went for them with lockdown and all those things. So it was interesting, but I don't think it was overwhelming because that just wasn't. It was more the setup for the story as opposed to like the main story, if that makes sense. The main story was the relationship and the secrets between these two that have just met. There was one scene though where they like turn a corner and they are setting up like a triage center, which really was kind of like a punch to the gut. When I read it, I wasn't expecting it. So just beware that this does mention the pandemic, and it doesn't mention it a lot, but it is present throughout the whole book. But I thought this was a fascinating thriller. I felt like I saw some things coming, but then I totally was surprised by some. So it was interesting. It was really fun to talk about for book club. So I'm gonna leave that on my favorite list for the fall. Another one I read this fall was The Death of Mrs Westaway by Ruth Ware, and I find Ruth Ware's books are all typically kind of the same for me. Again, not like my favorite. If somebody said like, what's the best mystery you've read this fall, I would not pick this one, but it was still just so fun to read. Does that make sense? Do you have those where You know it's not like the best of the best, but it's just a fun experience. And that's what I want from most books. So I'm totally happy with this. But I must say it was very strange to read this right after reading The Inheritance Games with my school book club. That one was very similar in premise to these. Both of those have a kind of down on their luck girl who gets notified that this older person has died and left them a huge inheritance, and then they have to go and deal with the family that has been disinherited. So I mean, I feel like it was very similar in the setup. This just seemed a little bit more adult, and I think in some ways I liked this one more just because it didn't have a lot of the YA drama, but both were enjoyable. But this one I thought was fun. Again, it kept me going. I didn't really know what to expect. I didn't really know who to believe, and it was interesting to just hear about this awesome house and all the relatives and how they come together. So I thought this one was pretty interesting. This is one of the better Ruth Wares that I think that I have read recently. So I'm going to leave it on my fall favorites. Next up is one that would be perfect for the holiday season, and that is The Matzo Ball by Jen Meltzer. My only complaint is that people do tend to compare like Hanukkah to Christmas, and even though I'm not Jewish, I get the impression that that's not like the best comparison. Like I don't think Christmas is like Hanukkah. I mean, that's just not the equivalent, but they just happen at the same time. So with that in mind, I mean, it's still kind of fun. Basically, you have a Jewish character who is secretly writing like Christmas Hallmark books, essentially, and she's hiding it because her whole family is very Jewish, and she thinks they're going to be hurt if they find out. And she ends up having to break into, well, I shouldn't say break into, but try to find a ticket to this elusive matzo ball because her publisher decides that they don't want another Christmas romance from her. They want a Hanukkah romance from her. And so the book is really about her trying to find like the magic of Hanukkah, I guess. And there's a lot of humorous points. I do think that one of my favorite things about this book, besides some of the family members, because they were just adorable, was the fact that our main character is living with a disability. The reason she's needing to write is because she has what is commonly known as chronic fatigue syndrome, and she's not really able to go out and work like a quote-unquote normal job. So she really does value and need access to her writing job where she can stay home and kind of monitor her health and make sure she's staying healthy. So I think I really like that as like a main character where, although, I mean, technically it does hold her back, she didn't let it stop her. I enjoyed that part of this book, and it was just cute and fun. It's a little romance, and I just really enjoyed it. I liked learning about some of the Hanukkah traditions, and like I said, I think the best part of this book were some of the family members. I just love some of these family members so much. It was fun to read. Next up, I feel like you're going to hear me talk about this book a lot on my channel because I just really enjoyed it. I guess it was kind of surprising, but in a way it wasn't. I don't know why I wasn't expecting to love this book, but I did. And it's called Arsenic and Adobo by Mia P. Manansala. And basically it's about this woman who has moved back in with her aunts, and one of them is named Tita Rosie, and that's the name of the series, a Tita Rosie kitchen mystery. So basically her and her aunts run this restaurant, and I believe it's like her ex-boyfriend, who she's kind of like contentious with now, comes in with, I think it's his father, and they both end up being poisoned by the food. And of course everybody thinks that they did it, specifically her, that she has poisoned them in their restaurant. So they end up having to shut the restaurant down, and the aunts are kind of beside themselves because not only is it like their life, but that's how they make their money. So I mean, it's a really rough time for them, but it is a cute little cozy mystery, and I loved all the food that was involved and all of the Filipino culture. It was just really fun to read kind of a more diverse, cozy mystery. I like experiencing other cultures that are not familiar to me, and so this one was really fun, and I love the cover, and I just received an advanced copy of the second one, and I am so excited because I like the setup of these, and I love the core family, like the aunts. I love them. They're so sweet and adorable, and I'm so excited to continue on in this series. Next is another one I read for my my book club, and it's called Spook Science Tackles the Afterlife by Mary Roach. Now, this was my first Mary Roach, and I just really didn't know what to expect going in, but I really enjoyed it. I don't think this is a book that you would like sit and read in one sitting, like 56 Days. It's not like a thriller. This is a nonfiction. It's basically Mary Roach herself going to investigate all these claims of proof of the afterlife. So like the very first essay or section or whatever you want to call it was her traveling through India with a man who was documenting families saying that their child had been reincarnated and knew all of these details of someone who had recently died somewhere else in India. And then it ends with like this very scientific study using images when people have like near-death experiences. So, I mean, it really, you know, spans the whole gamut. There was even one about a court case where they technically like proved that there was a ghost. I mean, it just covers a lot, and it was very fascinating. I really enjoyed this reading experience. Again, not one you're going to probably sit down and blow through in one day, but very exciting and interesting and fascinating nonetheless. I very much am looking forward to reading more Mary Roach in the future. The next up, I read Killers of the Flower Moon, The Osage Murders, and the Birth of the FBI by David Grann. Now, I will kind of caveat this by saying I did have like a hard time with this book, and I can't really pinpoint why. So let me explain, let me break down the reading journey for you. So first, I started reading a digital advanced copy of the young adult adaptation. And I just wasn't getting through it. I could have been just busy and just didn't make the time for reading. Maybe it was just the format. Maybe I just wasn't in the mood to read an electronic copy on my computer. Or maybe it was the young adult adaptation that I just wasn't enjoying myself as an adult. I really think young adult adaptations are amazing, but perhaps this just wasn't working for me. Nonetheless, I owned a physical copy, like a paperback copy of the regular original adult version. And when I switched to that and threw in a little bit of an audio, I mean, I just flew through it. So there's so many things that could have gone kind of wonky for me at the beginning. So I'm just kind of throwing that out because I tore through this book after I switched editions and got the audio. I thought this was fantastic and just so interesting. I literally didn't know about anything in this book. So basically this is just what it says. It's about the Osage murders. I had no idea that the Osage people had earned so much money from the government because of the oil that was found under their land. And David Grann purports that they became, I think they said, the richest per capita people of anyone in the world at that time, which, again, had no idea. Super cool, but had no idea. And then all these shenanigans began. And by shenanigans, I mean awful things that happened to them that also I didn't know about. First of all, the guardianship, where they basically said that the Native American Osage Indians were not competent enough to control their own money, so they were assigned a white male adult as a quote-unquote guardian to help them make decisions, and we all know how well that went. And then a lot of these Osage Indians started dying mysteriously, and no one was really taking it serious. No one really cared because they were just Osage Indians. And I mean, of course it's believable, but it's just so sad. Then one by one, they did have people that try to start to help and uncover what was happening, and then they started dying. So eventually the FBI was sent in, and it was a newly formed group. It was still just called the Bureau of Investigation, and like I said, very new. So they wanted to go in and discover what was happening, and there was a detective that really did kind of uncover some truths, but David Grann leads you to believe that it wasn't completely solved, that there were probably a lot more people involved, which is also believable. But it was just really interesting. It reads like a typical true crime, and you're just fascinated until the end. And I just recently found out I think they're going to make this a movie, so I am super excited to go see the movie. And yeah, I just thought this was so fascinating. So if this sounds interesting to you, definitely pick it up. And again, I would recommend doing the audio. The audio was pretty good. They had multiple narrators, which was a lot of fun. So definitely check this one out. And last but not least, for my book club, we are reading Winter Counts for our early December meeting by David Heska Wanbley Wyden. And this was interesting. Like, I wanted to read it, but I just didn't think I was going to enjoy it as much as I did. I just thought this was fantastic. First of all, I had no idea what winter counts was. I didn't know how that was going to make sense. I kept thinking, I wonder how this title is going to come up. And basically what it is almost like a Native American calendar. So they would count the years by winters. So the kind of similar to how we do, like in the middle of winter we roll over the new year. So kind of similar to that. And I think every tribe had their own like idea of exactly when it was, and they would come up with a symbol every year to count that year. And the symbol would be something that was kind of like remarkable or memorable for the people for that year. So like for instance, everybody's been getting a lot of COVID shots this year, so maybe the symbol would be like a syringe. I think that was what my dad said when I asked, what would you make your symbol? Maybe like a syringe or something would be something that signified this year for a lot of people, and that would be the mark to show that this winter was counted, which I just thought that was so fascinating. I didn't know about that. And I haven't even gotten to the book yet, so already you just need to read it because it's fascinating. But essentially we have Virgil, who's a like Indian vigilante on the reservation, because they're kind of in this weird spot where like the tribal council doesn't have a lot of authority, and the FBI is kind of unwilling to jump in and handle every single problem that they have unless it's some huge case. So they pay people like Virgil to go in and kind of give people some justice. Vigilante justice. And that's how the book opens. He has been paid to go track down this guy and kind of lay a beat down. And then you just get to know him more, and you get to like him more, and you just really root for him. And I would say this is very, like, it gets pretty gory and pretty detailed in some places, so just beware of that it gets pretty graphic. And there is a very detailed description of a child dying by being left in the car and freezing to death, so just know that that's coming. But anyway, basically we follow Virgil as he's kind of on his vigilante track, but when he gets a call about like drugs and heroin coming into the reservation, he's not sure he wants to get involved, but then it hits home. His nephew, who he's the caregiver for, ends up overdosing and then getting arrested for distributing drugs, which he claims he didn't do, and on and on and on. How that unrolls is just very fascinating. I mean, I was on the edge of my seat to see what was going to happen, and I thought it was really good. I kind of think I guessed who it was pretty early, but it was still very interesting to see how it all came together. And again, like, there's kind of a brutal, kind of gory scene at the end, so please just be aware that that is going to happen in this book. But it was very interesting. I'm hoping that there is a second book. I'm hoping this kind of becomes a series with Virgil, because I would read more. I definitely would. But I really liked this. I thought it was all very interesting, very informative. It tied in really well, actually, with some things I'd learned in Flowers of the Killer Moon, with some of the like Indian traditions and whatnot, some of the struggles that Indians had throughout the years. So it was nice to kind of read those pretty close together as well. So those were my favorite books that I read this fall. Have you read any of these? Would you want to read any of these now that I've told you a little bit about them? And let me know what some of your favorite fall books were so I can jump on those and read them as well. Let's talk books down in the comments, and thank you so much for watching. I will see you again in another video soon. Bye for now.